for me. Blood in my dog and I can't see. I'm trying to be what I'm destined to be. And niggas trying to take my life away. I put a hole in a nigga for fuck.
Well, it's been a few days and I've got Jessica's E93 back from Susie and it's all wrapped. Looks great. And I'll give you guys a walk around of that. Also got the wing mounted on the VQS13. So I'm going to show you that as well. But let's start off with her BMW. I don't have all the panels fully mounted right now. They're just got a couple fasteners on each panel to hold it together so we could bring it home last night. Also don't have the rear spats on at all. That's not even connected, but. So the BMW came out nice. Looks pretty awesome. Jessica really likes it. For the hatch, you can see I got the drag wing on. Let me give you a walk around of that. I was going back and forth between the drag wing and the BCL like I usually run, but this hatch had a whole bunch of factory holes in it. So I figured, what the heck, let's switch things up. Ordered a drag wing, it covered up all the holes. And I was actually able to use 4 of the factory holes in the hatch. And I just went to the hardware store and got some studs like for manifolds. And I fiberglassed 4 studs into the wing to bolt it down. Yeah, it came out pretty good. Got the wheel and tire fitment all good. Brought out the rear quite a bit to be flush with the over fender. And also swapped out the front tires from a 225/45 to a 235/40. I think in about a week or so, I'm gonna take these to Shane's one at a time and build and have him, he's got a tube bender and we're gonna bend a main hoop for both of these cars. And then I can bring them home and do a back half cage in both of them. Obviously we need that in the convertible to meet requirements for a lot of drift tracks. Since it is a convertible, it needs some sort of roll bar. And it's nice to have with bucket seats so that you can run harnesses safely. And if the car did roll over, it's a lot safer. So I'm gonna put one in this car as well. So that way I can run the bucket seats and harnesses in this. Also, let me show you what I got at the port a couple days ago. This is a 98 GX100 Toyota Chaser. Most people know them as the JZX, but the base model is a GX. Comes with a 6-cylinder Beams 1G FE motor. This one is super clean with only 65,000 original miles and bone stock. So the plan for the Chaser is gonna be to use this bad boy. Got this 2JZ. If you watch previous videos, you'll see I got an S14 and a 2J package deal. And the last few weeks I've been collecting parts for the 2J to get it ready to swap. So stay tuned for that build starting soon, but I would like to wrap everything else up first. It is time to finally do the performance parts on Jessica's E93. It's a 335i twin turbo N54. This car was bone stock when we got it, but obviously it's gonna be Jessica's 2025 Chick Flicks team drift car. So we've done suspension upgrades already, Pandem wide body kit, full wrap job by Auto Alchemy, our friend Susie, a basic bolt-on knuckle adapter for angle. And I'm waiting for a few parts to show up for the hydro because I still need to do the hydro install. We're just gonna do an inline setup, tuck it nice in the center console, and then I gotta weld the diff. While I wait for those parts to show up, I'm gonna do a full bolt-on kit by ARM Motorsports. Shout out to those guys for hooking me up with the parts to do this. Great quality parts, great company, good communication, and great pricing. So hit them up if you're looking for parts for your N54 or BMW. I already got started. I am mechanically inclined, but I'm not super familiar with BMWs, and this stuff is all pretty simple. I'm gonna go over with you all the parts that I removed so far, and then I'll show you the new parts that we're putting on. So these are basically all the parts that I took off that I'm gonna reuse or replace with the ARM Motorsports parts. First thing you do is take out the coolant reservoir and these two boost tubes, and those are usually located right here. And the reason why you have to do that is because with the full bolt-on kit, I did opt for the inlet relocation. So instead of having the pipes that run over here with the air filters on this side of the motor, you're gonna have two air filters right here that just shoot straight down to the turbos. You can see I also took the fan out, and that's right there. And that was to make room for the front inlet. So once you get these parts out, then you move on to the cowling. So you take this piece off for the factory air box intake, and then this is up against the firewall. That's underneath that goes against the firewall, and then your engine cover. And I kind of laid this out as if it was on the motor, so you can kind of see where everything goes. Front mount intercooler dropped out from in front of the radiator. That was very simple, a bolt on each side, and then disconnect this pipe here from the turbo side, and then this pipe I took out. So once you take the air filters off, or the factory air box, whatever you have, you can then take this piece off of the throttle body. It disconnects there, and then this goes down to the intercooler. So you disconnect that, and then disconnect your factory bypass valve hoses, and those just pop right out. And then from under the car, you can disconnect this from the intercooler, and then this is already going to be off because you already took this pipe off, and then you can pull this out. Then you can move on to the front inlet. It's not too bad. It's basically two bolts right here, and then this side will already be disconnected, and then that side that goes to the turbos just slides off. So once you have this stuff off and those two bolts off, you just kind of put one hand here and one hand by the turbo and just pull it forward, and it'll pop off the turbo. Then you just wiggle it out. So now you've got all this stuff off. Now you've got the biggest pain part probably. Take all the under trays off the car from underneath, and then you got to remove the down pipes to get to the rear inlet. The down pipes are pretty straightforward. You unbolt the 12mm nuts from the exhaust, and then you disconnect the O2 sensors from underneath the car, and then you go up here on top of the car and you disconnect the other O2 sensors right here, and then you backfeed the wiring for the two O2 sensors on top and just let them hang loose right here. So then when you drop the down pipes, that way you can feed the wiring out. Also, from underneath the car, you're gonna put a wobbly joint on a 14mm socket and go up at this angle right here, and that'll take these clamps off to disconnect the down pipe from the turbo itself. And then you'll want a long screwdriver of some kind. Push these up either onto the turbo or onto the down pipe, because if you just leave these hanging, it's gonna bind up the V-band joint and you won't be able to pull them off. So you do want to pop this one way or the other. And then you'll also have a 12mm nut on each down pipe that holds it onto a bracket under the car. It's pretty straightforward. And then these will wiggle out. And then once these are wiggled out, then you can move on to the rear inlet. Since I'm not going to be reusing any of this stuff or putting a silicone inlet on the back of the engine, I didn't really care about it. So what I did was I disconnected this sensor, which is this guy here. It disconnects right there from the inlet, and then it disconnects right there from this part of the valve cover. Once you do that, you can, from underneath the car above where the down pipes were, you can take the Sawzall and just cut this off from under the car, and then that'll allow you to get the elbow off. Now that that's off and everything's disconnected on it, only thing holding it on will be these two bolts, which you can see I just broke off. Easiest way to do that was to use a tire bar, and you basically just shove it right here where the bolts are and just go pop, and it'll basically just pop the plastic off, and then that rear inlet will fish out from this side. I think if you look up the proper way to do this, it's to drop the engine down a couple inches by loosening the subframe and everything, and then you can get tools back there to take those bolts off. That's probably the best way to do it if you have to replace that with a factory piece or another piece that utilizes those bolts. But since I'm not using those at all, I wasn't going to go through all that trouble when I could just pop the plastic and just leave those two bolts where they are. It's time to open up the box from ARM Motorsports and see all the new parts and lay them out and start coming up with a game plan on which parts to install first. Now that I've got everything laid out, kind of show you everything that I got here. So I got the N54 inlets, the front mount intercooler lower charge pipe, N54 turbo outlets, the catless downpipes, the stencil, the blow-off valve, the charge pipe, the adapters for the inlets, the front mount intercooler, and the blow-off valve upgraded line kit. So the one part I forgot to take off last night when I was removing everything was the turbo outlets. So basically you have this pipe here that goes to the back turbo, and then that pipe there goes to the front turbo, and then they go together to go to the front mount intercooler. It should just be a V-band on the front turbo, and then disconnect it from the rubber hose that goes to the back turbo. And then that gets replaced with this piece. So you can see it goes, the bend there goes to the front turbo, and then the straight piece goes to the back turbo, and then that'll go to the intercooler. And then I also need to disconnect this lower water line. It went to the bottom of the coolant reservoir, but since I'm relocating the coolant reservoir from this side to this side, the kit does come with an extension to put in between those. So I do need to disconnect that from the T-fitting down below. So I'm gonna take that off and the other pipe off, so that way then I'm at a fresh starting point to start installing parts. It does come with the rear section to replace this piece right here. So I did have one more pipe to take off. It's pretty simple. Basically just goes to the turbo right there with one V-band clamp. So I got that off, and now this is going to be my first install piece. It's got a V-band end on it and then a hose clamp end on it. So the V-band clamp end will go to the turbo, and then there's a little O-ring that'll go in there. Now I'm gonna start installing parts. All right, you can see I got the back pipe on for the turbo, but I hooked up the V-band and just left it snug so that way this would still move. So that now when I slide the front Y pipe in, I can match it up to this turbo and then clamp this without this being too tight. And then once I get these two parts hooked up, I'll tighten all this side down, and then I'll go down there and tighten that V-band back up. I also noticed I need to put the adapter on the front face of the turbo housing for the turbo inlets. And I have tons of room right now to do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this one on before I put the Y pipe in, because then the Y pipe will just be in the way. So I'm gonna do that right now. And then I'll probably go ahead and throw the adapter on the back turbo. That way if I do have to remove this to make it easier, I can do that. Now I know why when you watch bolt-on videos, the turbo outlet pipes are usually a mod that people don't do. The new pipes from ARM are a larger diameter, So it is going to be a nice increase in airflow for the setup. But the V-band on the front turbo is very difficult to get in there. I am extremely glad that I put the inlet adapter on the front of the turbo before I did all this, because I would not want to take that off to do that again. I now have my first upgraded part fully installed. So this is the Y pipe that goes from the front mount intercooler to the front turbo, and then it splits off and then has another pipe that goes to the back turbo. It uses the factory V-band flange on the turbos, and then it goes up here to the intercooler. Success. I think the next piece of the puzzle that I'm going to tackle is going to be the inlets. And the reason why is because the rear one is also kind of a pain to fish it around and then get it to hook up to the back of the back turbo. But once I get that on and mounted, I can go ahead and throw the downpipes on. Here's the inlet kit. It comes with a bunch of nice heat shields and brackets and stuff. So I'm gonna start off by taking the boost solenoids off of the engine, of the valve cover, and then kind of move those out of the way. And then I'll get the heat shields mounted, because you won't be able to get to the bolts for the heat shield on the back side once that inlet's in the way. So I'm gonna take the boost solenoids off, put the heat shield on, and then slide that rear inlet down. Well, as you can see, I got the rear inlet on and I got the front inlet on. The front was actually pretty easy. Just put the clamp on and then weave it down, push it onto the turbo, and then reposition the clamp so you can get a long extension onto it to tighten it down. The rear one was a little more difficult. You slide it in from the bottom between the wastegate and the chassis, and then once you get it almost to where it needs to be, you rotate it up over the wastegate, and then you have to go back up here and push it towards the firewall. So then the hose will naturally want to bend towards the turbo, and then you push it on the turbo, feed a clamp over, tighten it down. Next is going to be the air filters. So you got 2 air filters there. Got the air filter bracket and then the heat shield. So this is what it looks like with the filters installed. It's pretty simple. There's just a bracket that has a clamp for each of these hoses, and then put a clamp for each of the air filters, and then 2 bolts with little spacers to get them up off the filter. For now, I'm going to go back underneath and make sure the rear inlet is tight on the turbo and doesn't need to change. Tighten that down and make sure it's snug, and then I'm going to move on to the downpipes. The downpipes are going to be pretty straightforward, so I'm just going to set them next to the one that it goes to, and then swap the sensors over front and rear to the new downpipes, and then bolt them in. All these things are from ARM Motorsports. Make sure you hit them up if you need any BMW specific performance parts. These parts are all super good quality. I'm super happy with the fit and finish of everything so far, and I can't wait to fire this thing up. I think the next thing I'm going to do is install the front mount intercooler and the charge pipe, since those are underneath these other items, and then I'll just kind of work my way up in the engine bay. I got the power steering reservoir relocated. You basically unbolt it from this bracket with these 2 bolts, and then you loosen these hoses so you can twist them, and then install this ARM Motorsports bracket to the alternator, and then they give you hardware to put this on there. Like I said, you just loosen these or break the clamps and put a new clamp on, and then those will twist, and you just basically turn it like that. So that's done. Also, the sensor that was on the inlet over here, I had to extend those lines. And then it plugs in to the adapter on the new rear inlet. So that's all done, and I went ahead and wrapped the line for that. O2 sensors, I rerouted those back up around the heat shield and plug those back in. And now the next thing I'm gonna do is the relocation of the coolant reservoir. So the coolant reservoir used to be here, and now it's gonna go here. So I need to put a bracket here, and the sensor on the bottom, I need to do a little trimming, and then you take it out and reposition it and put it back in. That way, instead of the sensor wiring pointing towards the wheel, it'll point this way. And then the sensor is gonna be right here, which is the other one that is gonna have to be relocated. So I gotta extend that, wrap it and zip tie it up here so it'll plug into there. First, I'm gonna mount that. Well, as you can see, I extended this wire. The plug was right there. This goes to the coolant reservoir. So I extended it. And now here's the new plug that'll plug into the bottom of the coolant reservoir that's mounted over here with this bracket. And you can see I have my lower coolant hose routed. And also I installed the blow-off valve on the charge pipe, and I went ahead and clicked that onto the throttle body. I got the new front mount intercooler installed. It's actually super simple. There's some studs that go in the factory mounts, and then the nuts go on the studs. So that's pretty sweet. Also went ahead and clipped in the charge pipe. I already had the blow-off valve hooked up to the charge pipe, and I also already had the meth injection plugs sealed and tight. And I also swapped over the sensor right there off of the OEM pipe. So plugged that in, that's all hooked up. I got this intercooler pipe hooked up. You can see it's got an elbow off the intercooler, and then an elbow, a hard pipe elbow, and then another silicone elbow. And I also got this side of the intercooler hooked up. It's just one silicone elbow that goes from the new turbo pipe. Let's see, that would be the turbo outlets. It goes from the both turbos to one, and then a silicone coupler that goes from that to this side of the front mount intercooler. You can see I got my wiring attached to the fan wiring for the extension. I ran out of loom, but I loomed it from here back and tied it up. Well, I also ran out of zip ties, so I do need to go buy some more zip ties. But this wire runs up a little bit extra long, and then it's plugged in, and the fan's in. So I did have to take there's metal braces. I don't know if it's all in all E90 chassis, but it's on the E93. There's metal braces like this that basically go from the little tiny skid plate on the front of the motor, comes up, bolts onto this frame rail, and then bolts on up here. And then another one that connects to that same bolt down there, and then it connects to the frame rail right there, and then it bolts to here. This one I didn't technically have to remove, but since I loosened up all the bolts to get this side out, I went ahead and took them both out. In order to fit the intercooler pipe, you do have to remove that to make room for the intercooler pipe and the new coolant crossover hose. Now that I got the charge pipe in, I went ahead and solid mounted the coolant reservoir, and I also hooked the upper coolant hose back up, and then the coolant bleed hose. Got that hooked up. Now, I'm pretty sure the last piece of the puzzle is gonna be the blow-off valve. So normally this would have a nipple sticking off right here, and you would just hook it up, I'm assuming, to these factory lines. I went ahead and got the upgrade kit. So the upgrade kit comes with a block spacer that basically spaces the map sensor up off the intake manifold, and then it has a port there. And then it has this guy. So one side will go to the blow-off valve, and one guy will go to the block spacer. It's supposed to be a better, more reliable boost source. So I'm gonna hook that up now. Technically, I have everything installed. You can see the block spacer for the intake manifold that has the line, and it hooks up to the blow-off valve there. And everything else is in. I guess technically the final step is going to be to use the ARM cutout and paint the logo onto the intercooler down there. But I want to fire it up first. Let's put some coolant in this bad boy and see what she sounds like. All right, ready for the first fire. ARM Performance E93 full bolt-on kit. Starts. Success. Sounds pretty cool.
Good job.
Well, finally I get to burn all the garbage from all these parts that we just put on Jessica's car. I just want to thank ARM Motorsports again for helping us out with the parts for this build. And now we're excited to get this thing tuned and see what she's really got. It'll run just fine as is. But of course now it's got the supporting mods to turn up the boost a little bit. We'd probably have to do a few other little things to turn up the boost a lot, but that's not our goal. Our goal was just to clean up the engine bay, give it a little more power, and then maybe turn up the boost a little bit. But the tune will also just optimize the way that it runs. So turning up the boost isn't the only benefit of getting a tune. But thanks again, ARM Motorsports. I'm gonna end this video here, guys. Like, comment, subscribe. Stay tuned for the next video. It'll be a track update. Peace.